Right, before I come to my practical suggestions of how to proceed, let me clarify a few concepts. They're really trivial, but nonetheless, I have to cover them. I have to mention them. And the first one is articulation. There is no way for integral theory to work, particularly not as a collective, if people don't learn to articulate their point of view. It has been one major idea in the whole Bildung tradition, in this personal development tradition, the Germans came up with, that a basic starting point is to articulate your view, to start with a diary, to start writing on a consistent basis. And there actually today are far more and diverse ways of articulating your position. There are actually new media introduced a few new ways of articulating perspectives without you necessarily being a writer, without you necessarily producing a piece of text. But I think I gave the example already. If you just share what kind of books you're reading, and that's something that you don't need to write for, you just click on what you're reading right now, or what you have read in the past, you already articulate something of your own perspective and how it is becoming. This is very important and something that we have to make sure everyone learns. And if people don't learn to do this, and if we don't find formal ways of forcing people to articulate their perspectives, I mean, they have been given the channel, right? New media have actually given you the possibility to express your opinion. And if people don't learn to do that, I don't see us doing anything on a collective level. The thing is, we have to strive for getting as many people as possible up into Bildung and to reflect on themselves and find their ways of contributing to the society in general. And we have the formal aspects, which will force you by just using specific kinds of devices and specific kinds of media. And without really being aware of it, you will express aspects of your personality and aspects of your world experience that are potentially important to others. But we also have to learn it on the content level. This is what we do at universities, where you simply are taught to write, where you're taught to express yourself in consistent narratives that matter to other people. So there is no way around articulation, but what we will need with any kind of integral hub or integral community is a very diversified form of articulation. It will not only be the traditional way of doing it by creating narratives and by writing articles and books. That's by far not enough. We need far more ways of articulation. And the reasons for that I'll come to in some of the next videos. Another point that is also very important is that sequence matters. The sequence in which you learn things or are acquainted with things is crucially important. I can remember that as a kid I picked out randomly books from the library, and they of course ended up being most of the time the wrong books. And that's not because they're bad books, but just because they weren't the right books for me at this specific moment in time. This is something where we have to become more efficient, and we have to find ways of making the learning experience for people generally more rewarding, so that you don't feel like you get stuck all the time and pick out the wrong practices or the wrong books, but that you can feel some kind of consistency in your life, that you're working on something and really getting forward, getting somewhere. Universities are a really good place for this, because you are in a special protected environment where you're actually spoon-fed on a specific path of development. And I think these years are, you really experience a lot of development of your own understanding in the specific area that you're studying, and you really feel like from week to week your picture is getting bigger. Take on the other hand the unstructured everyday life. I think this is the other contrast, the other extreme, if you want, where I think learning experiences are largely unguided and learning experiences are largely random. And if you think about it, how systematically you have been able to learn something in the past year, I think most of us have had the experience that we were mostly living and mostly doing the same, but not really learning. It's not like there are really huge insights and systematic insights, particularly, that would define our present, our normal everyday life, unless, of course, you have the time and the persistence to go on a learning path and search for that which really gets you further in your own development and in your own understanding. But this is usually an effort that most people can't take because they can't bring together with making a living and well, developing in general and learning in general. So we have to find ways of well, giving people the right kind of stuff at the right kind of time in their life, so that they can have an entire life of learning, where they make baby steps and develop an entire life without really falling into this everyday experience of just being there, just doing the same thing forever and getting lost in boredom, which is also a very interesting philosophical topic to cover. Another important issue is, if you have something to share, if you have something to contribute, you have to learn to put it as near as possible to the object about which it's talking about, to which it is related. Because if you don't do that, it simply will remain invisible. The way we're doing it right now, like sharing videos on Facebook and sharing videos on YouTube, is highly inefficient. Because we're not really placing our contributions near to the objects that they're actually talking about. If you want someone to find a key for the door, where would you put the key? You put it in the immediate proximity to the door so that the person can find it. And this is something that you can use as a general principle whenever you're trying to communicate some kind of insight. Think about how you can put whatever you have to say about something specific as close as possible to the very object. Because the reality right now with internet is not the things that are not inaccessible. Accessibility is not the problem. A lot of things are accessible today. The problem is not them being not accessible, but them not being visible. If you have to type something into Google, if you have to search for it explicitly, it is already something that doesn't really exist for you. In other words, the object doesn't really pop up on your timeline on Facebook, for example. The likelihood of you going up and searching for it and researching on it, embedded in the kind of life that we live and the kind of workflow that we have in our everyday experience, the likelihood of us doing that is actually extremely low. So the object won't simply be there for us. It won't exist. So people, in other words, what I'm saying here is, we have to put the kind of insights that we want to share as closely as possible to the person who is asking the question, and at the time when they're asking the question, so that they can find it. This might sound a bit weird, but I think it will become very obvious once I use the social media examples in some of the following videos. The next principle is syndication. I don't actually know what the term exactly means, but in new media, this has been a term that has been used to signify the general idea that you can actually disembed a kind of content from its initial source, from the place where it has been initially expressed or stated. For example, if you publish an article in a specific paper, the idea of syndication is that you use a kind of format that can then be embedded on other social media and other social media channels, for example, so that it can be reposted, retaining its major structure. So if you want to syndicate on social media, what you have to do is not only write an article, but you have to use a specific kind of format that is giving the machine the kind of data, the meta information that it needs to know, well, what is the body of the text, what is the title of the text, what are the headings of the text, what are the comments, well, comments, no, that's wrong. The kind of meta information that the machine needs to know what kind of unit of information it is, so that it can be embedded at other places. And this is something that you can use as a general principle when you communicate your ideas, to syndicate them, to make it as easily possible to share those ideas as units of meaning somewhere else. Because if you don't do that, I mean, the likelihood, again, of someone coming up and reading your entire work so that they can stumble upon this specific idea and see where it's embedded in your own personal worldview, is just, that's not the way we're doing it today. What we're doing with today is we're dealing constantly with fragments, and we have to break down our more complex views into such fragments. There's just no other way of communicating in our present-day society. That's how communication simply works, and we have to follow it. We have to follow with this, and we have to be as efficient and effective as possible when we're communicating our ideas. Another general idea that I think is also important is to create spaces for everyone to contribute on, well, I wouldn't say level, but in the right kind of way that they can contribute. Because I think it's possible, integral theory has been a good example of this, how it's possible to bring people together with different competencies and different strengths, and how every one of them, all of them having different commitments, of course, different also levels of commitment, can contribute to the bigger picture in constructive ways. It's like cooking together. You can't let everyone do the spicing. It's just you need specific persons who are experienced in this area. Otherwise, you will just ruin the soup. But yet, I think there are many different ways in which people can contribute for the bigger whole thing to work as almost like an organism. That's also a principle that I think we have to follow. I don't know what I wrote down here.